Welcome back, my friends, to another exciting week. We've got all the information on Flight 11 coming shortly, direct from SpaceX, with some neat new surprises. Yes, this mission is not quite what we had expected. Outside that, tales of awesomeness as we head toward more exciting action in the last quarter of this year, and also some disappointing destruction. What happened here?
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Hey, Marcus House with you here, and we've just got to kick off today with the release of the official recap video of Flight 10 from SpaceX. This was a nice way to start the week off, and because of some of the more recent flight test issues being cut short due to ship issues, the last time that we got to see one of these was for Flight 7, and they certainly didn't disappoint after the long wait. Great shots of the new Mission Control Center at the beginning here, and some of those screens have a ton of unique camera angles. Then we were right into the fire once again with some 4K views of liftoff that we hadn't seen yet. These shots never disappoint, showing the monstrous beast that is the Super Heavy, essentially acting like a real-life giant lightsaber after blasting away from the pad. I just love this scene of the ship as they pass through Max Q here, and finally a view from SpaceX of that shockwave there. The next scene skips right through into the hot staging sequence. After Flight 11, of course, we will never see this view of a hot staging ring floating away again, so great to see it here in this quality. Booster 16 in its final descent and landing burn were of course crammed in there, and this buoy camera of it performing the planned contingency burn with the backup engine from the middle ring we had not seen before. This also gives us good evidence that Booster 16 landed right on target. I was really hoping that SpaceX would release the intentionally destructive splashdown, but sadly no. A neat view of the upper stage Starship engine cutoff there though, and check out this payload deploy action that had soon followed.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
Although we had already seen these shots, wow, was that amazing to see for the first time. Even more incredible that it was all streamed out so beautifully live. Let's hope they nail this again with Flight 11. It's nice to see the crowd in the Star Factory in this recap too. You've got to love the Mars globe that they have hanging there as the scene switches to the very sci-fi shot of engine relight. Now, they skipped over the aft damage. I was hoping at some point we might get to see an external view of what happened there, but no, they jumped right into the deep end of the atmospheric re-entry. In this mission, they certainly proved that the updated design of these Block 2 forward flaps were a vast improvement from Block 1. That stress test that they did during re-entry was beautiful, and here we can see once more that tempering effect on the steel as it is heated by the plasma. We have here a brand new engine bay shot for landing burn ignition, followed by that unbelievable drone and buoy shot that we saw for the landing and the splashdown. That sure was an iconic orange Starship that we are unlikely to ever see again. So yeah, wrapping it all up, SpaceX teases Flight 11 here, along with the footage of Ship 38 firing on the mount last week. This was a great video, so check out the full thing. They never fail to build that hype, and we are hopefully just a little over a week away. SpaceX also, of course, released the website update for the next flight at the same time, and we've got some great detail here on what to expect. At the time of exporting this video out to go live, the target date for Flight 11 remains October 13. Now, assuming that they do launch on that day, it'll be quite a symbolic date, as it'll be the 1-year anniversary of Booster 12 coming in for the first ever tower catch. As is well known by now, this will be the final launch from the legged mount at Pad 1, and Booster 15 is the second ever reflight of a Super Heavy, having previously launched with Starship Flight Test 8. Now, what we weren't clear on, however, was how many Raptor engines would be reused. Well, now we know. 24 of the 33 Raptor engines are being reflown, and this is slightly fewer than when Booster 14 was reused in Flight 9. For that mission, 29 were reflown, but regardless, seeing this level of reuse is a big accomplishment in these early tests. Now, as expected, the plan for Super Heavy is for it to perform an experimental landing burn over the ocean, so no catch has been confirmed here now. I would have been surprised if that wasn't the case, given that these Block 2 missions are now ending. There really isn't any reason not to run some useful experiments on it to gather some edge case data. The landing sequence itself, though, has been changed for this coming flight. In Flight 10, SpaceX intentionally disabled a center engine to force a backup from the middle ring to kick in to compensate. This time though, they're actually trying something a little different. Here, SpaceX say that they will start the burn with the 13 as usual, but instead of transitioning down to the 3 engines, they will transition to 5 for the divert phase where the booster moves in heading towards the tower. They state here that this is the planned baseline for the version 3 Super Heavy during the section of the burn responsible for fine-tuning the booster's path. After that, they will cut off 2 of those, leaving just the center 3 as usual to cut off. On the upper stage Starship side of things, there are more differences here than I initially expected. There's still a lot of identical flight milestones to Flight 10 all the same. They will once again try to deploy 8 Starlink simulators on a suborbital trajectory where we hope to see the payload bay door and the deployment sequence working flawlessly again, this time perhaps without seeing one of them graze the door on its way out. Following that, Ship 38 will also attempt an in-space engine relight to adjust its incoming trajectory to the splashdown target. Here though, they say that this flight test includes several experimental and operational changes focused on enabling Starship to return to the launch site on future flights. This is exciting stuff. Once they have all the data that they need for this flight and the first version 3 Starship entry, we should see the next flights that follow to go fully orbital and then re-enter to be caught by the tower. Although they have removed experimental tiles for this mission, they are still removing some tiles across the ship to intentionally stress test vulnerable areas. They also say that several of the tiles removed are in areas where there is no backup ablative layer, so that'll be very interesting to watch play out. Presumably, these will be placed where a burn through wouldn't cause damage to the propellant tanks. Now finally this part here, we have a new type of test where the ship will do a dynamic banking maneuver to test subsonic guidance algorithms. Now what does that mean? Well, they want to mimic the path that a ship would need to take on its return to the tower at Starbase. That should include gliding around to the tower for the catch, as we've seen hinted at in some documents. So yes, with all these changes to Flight 11, it's going to be super exciting to watch, but how are things actually going to prepare for this beast to fly? At Pad 1, the team has been converting the mount back to normal. Last week, of course, we saw that makeshift adapter stand being removed, which just left them to hook up the makeshift quick disconnect structure and remove that from the top of the launch mount as well. With that out of the way, SpaceX could focus on any work needed to prepare for the Super Heavy to take the stand again. As one example, we've already seen them installing the clamps back onto the launch mount, so that prep work was well underway at the start of the week. Over here, the big SpaceX crane was laid down to begin the process of switching out the boom. That original SpaceX black painted boom was removed for refurbishment a while ago, and a lot of you have had some questions about why they did this. Normally these cranes only stay at a job site for a short period of time, after which it is broken down to its modular pieces. With this more common routine, the parts are refurbished and moved to the next site. In SpaceX's case though, they just keep the crane around all the time, so they still need to schedule in that same maintenance. In the meantime, they've been using a Buckner-owned boom so they can keep the crane available. Anyway, with the SpaceX boom pieces now stored in one of the lots close by, it was finally time again to remove the Buckner boom pieces, and they were sent off-site. Now, interestingly, there has been some activity on the mounting points for the ship quick disconnect arm on the new tower. Once the crane has been fully reassembled, it shouldn't be long before we see that arm move over to the launch site from the Sanchez area and installed on the tower. The Pad 2 ground support bunker is looking amazing. Check out how much of the cladding pieces have now been installed. Beautiful views of this by Sean, by the way. Further along at the production site, the Gigabay progress has come with a surprise. They've been busy putting down this layer of gravel right on top of the now almost finished pile cap. That, it seems, is for a very good reason. It's actually not that uncommon in construction for this style of building. This layer of gravel is called a decoupling layer. It allows the pile cap and the floor slab on top to move independently. As an extra bonus, it also allows them to use this gravel layer to easily run some of the utilities to the workstations. Heading over to the rapidly changing test site at Massey's, the work kicks along preparing for version 3 vehicles to test and general repairs. Before diving into that though, a huge thanks to Surfshark VPN sponsoring today's video and making what we do possible. You can think of a virtual private network service like the keys to an internet without borders. I don't know about you, but I'm always getting blocked from content due to my geographic location. It's like hitting a wall, and sport Entertainment and news sites all seem to be getting worse at blocking content outside their country of origin. Well, Surfshark has got you covered because you can easily make your device pretend it is in the country that you need. It is really easy. You just switch the VPN to connect through another country, hit refresh, and wow, it is all now unblocked for you. It's not all about unblocking content or binge watching your favourite series unavailable to you by default. Surfshark is perfect for keeping your online data and traffic history under wraps. After all, even your internet service provider would be recording some information on your activity. Although that isn't always a big concern though, what can be is using public Wi-Fi. Surfshark VPN and the tools that come with it will drastically minimise the risks associated with public connections. That is super useful, especially while travelling. And speaking of, price discrimination is something that you may not even be aware of. It works like this. Companies can simply offer different prices depending on the country that you are browsing from. So with a VPN, you can compare and make sure that you are getting a reasonable deal. What's more, with just the one subscription, you can use Surfshark VPN across all your devices at the same time. So secure your privacy with Surfshark VPN and get a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just head to surfshark.com/Marcus or use the code Marcus at checkout to get 4 extra months for free. You can also scan the QR code right there on screen. Thank you, Surfshark. Okay, so back to the Massey's test site. Thanks to RGV aerial photography, we can see the new concrete bunker coming up quickly. Formwork is now completely covering the roof of the larger section with rebar being installed. Over here, there is still concrete being broken out to re-pour the sections that didn't cure correctly on the first attempt. Now over at the methane side of the propellant farm, we can see a new set of pipe stands installed along the back side of the blast wall this week. Alongside those, we have the others previously installed behind the methane storage tanks, so perhaps instead of running cryogenic and gas lines together, SpaceX will split them instead into their own racks. It'll be intriguing to see what connects where over the coming weeks, but they should all eventually meet up with the pipes sticking out of the trench here heading towards the commodities bunker. Once in here, the lines split into their own sections, including their own sets of valves, high-pressure gas manifolds, and electrical connections for redundancy. After passing through here, SpaceX then needs to combine all these systems again as they head over to the new and more robust Ship Quick Disconnect structure. From here, the commodities will flow in and out of the next generation vehicles. This is all such a massive upgrade to what they started with a few months ago, and it's all being done so that in the event of another high energy failure, all SpaceX would in theory need to do is disconnect any damaged lines from the commodities bunker here and only replace those. Outside that, everything else is well protected by concrete or being run underground. Now jumping over to the Florida site this week, SpaceX are speeding along with the Starship pad construction at Launch Complex 39A, as we can clearly see thanks to NSF. Now you may previously remember me mentioning that SpaceX were moving in a bit of a different direction than at Starbase, with the orbital launch mount legs here being installed before the flame buckets had even been moved in. However, this week they kicked off installing not just a single bucket half, but the other half as well. This means they just need to install the water-cooled top ridge. Now, what we then expected to see was the delivery of another crane so that SpaceX could lift in the gigantic orbital launch mount. Well, parts for what seemed to be an LR13000 crane have started showing up this week, caught by Julia. This crane actually seems to be big enough to lift something like the orbital launch mount on its own, so that would be wild to see. At Starbase, Texas, SpaceX had lifted this massive load with 2 of the LR11000 cranes in tandem. Now here, you will notice SpaceX are ripping along with the construction of the 4th Starship tower. There are now 5 segments constructed with parts for the 6th already staged nearby. We had previously questioned whether this tower would be a catch-only tower for somewhere like Launch Complex 39A, or if it was a full launch tower for Launch Complex 37. Well, this week we can see that these sections have hardware mounts to support a Ship Quick Disconnect arm, so it certainly doesn't seem like a catch hatch-only tower at this point. There are 4 of these sections in total, which we can see much more clearly in these images taken by Sean in Texas with the new tower at Pad 2. Of course, you don't need the ability to load a Starship with propellant if you're only catching, and although it could be possible to use a quick disconnect system to offload remaining propellant at some point, we've never seen mention of such a thing, so most likely this is a full launch tower being built. At the Florida Gigabay, Max captured one of the 4 tower cranes rising up with steel beams already being staged nearby. Over here, there was just one more pour left to complete the pile cap. He was quick to get back in the sky again just days later though, and by then, SpaceX had fully constructed that tower crane. That pile cap was complete and they were already installing vertical steel sections. Just like SpaceX's previously released renders, the Gigabay does indeed look like it will have the smooth outer exterior. The supports would be on the inside of the building, which is unlike the Megabays at Starbase in Texas, which all featured these exterior supports. This would be quite handy actually, and would allow them to more rapidly install walkways on these supports around the whole building on multiple levels. That would all be very useful when building these monsters. Now, along with all that SpaceX news, this graphic was released this week. Why is Starship sitting on what looks to be a solid rocket booster? Yeah, I had no shortage of emails and comments on this one, and of course, it has nothing to do with Starship. No, this was a post by ESA Space Transport. They have, it seems, signed a 24-month contract for development activity around creating a demonstration reusable upper stage. If you can't beat them, join them, I guess. Now, more than likely, this is just a mock-up and is not part of any real design at this stage, but it certainly ended up with some quite comical responses. Thanks for sending in your thoughts on this, of course, and being subscribed here. You would be surprised how much of these videos are driven by your messages there below. This contract is between ESA and Avio, and they want to kick off a vehicle that could be launched into orbit and then return to Earth to be reused. Avio on the site here says that they will be developing this with liquid propulsion systems in mind, particularly focusing on technology using liquid oxygen and, of course, methane. Seems a fairly common strategy these days, don't you think? Now, compared to what we've seen over the past few months, a fairly quiet week for Falcon 9. Starlink Group 1120 was away Sunday in the early evening, just at that beautiful hour to catch some jellyfish action. This was Booster 1063 on its whopping 28th flight from Vandenberg Space Force Base. This was also the 8th launch from Vandenberg here in just a single month, which is crazy. As we come up to stage separation, you can see the sun now lighting that plume up beautifully, while the darkening sky below was giving up this brilliant contrast in the sky. Shout out to Tony at ground level who recorded this site. You can see the second stage engine plume lighting the whole area up, and these small puffs here is the booster using its reaction control system to reorient itself to come back in through the atmosphere. Back with the onboard cameras, we then had the fairing jettison giving us views of the 28 satellites on board, but then back to the ground, there are those 2 little dots falling away. Those fairings just free fall back into the atmosphere to be recovered in the ocean to fly again. Just magic. Thank you, Tony. Back to the darkness, the booster screamed back in moments later to be caught by the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You. Certainly the most spectacular mission of the week. Next up was the one remaining Starlink Group 1139 mission, early Friday morning again from Vandenberg, so it's been a bit quieter from Florida this week. Only the second flight for Booster 1097 here, another identical set of 28 satellites at Fairing Jettison, and Of Course I Still Love You had already returned the previous booster and was here again for its second catch of the week. Some more fun updates from the International Space Station. The Dragon, with the unique boost kit installed in the trunk, kicked off a 15-minute burn recently, which increased the entire station's speed by 1.62 meters per second. Given that the first 5-minute test was reported to have increased the station's altitude by about 1 mile at perigee, this would have been about 3 times that. This photo was taken by Zena Cardman, the commander of the Crew 11 mission, and it's interesting because we can see the Dracos firing from the centre there. We had not directly seen where those engines were arranged, but this makes it pretty clear now. Another quick mention here, also captured by Xena, she managed to pick up this almost bizarre mirage of the moon setting through the Earth's atmosphere as the International Space Station whips around the world 16 times a day. As she said in this post, the distortion and the colours are caused by the atmospheric refraction and the light being scattered differently as it sets out of view. That's a wild shot. It almost looks like ripples in water. Another batch of neat stuff from Blue Origin again this week too, as they gear up for a busy last quarter of 2025, hopefully an even bigger year ahead with several major missions coming up too. To prepare for the long-awaited Blue Moon Mark 1 demonstration mission, they've shared some great hot-fire video of the BE-7 vacuum engine. Blue Origin has been hot-firing this up to 5 times a day. This engine is designed to power the Moon Mark 1 lander, the Human Landing System Blue Moon Mark 2 variant, and even their Lunar Transporter spacecraft, so they are stress testing this like crazy. As shared here, it has a specific impulse of 460 seconds, which may not mean much unless you understand those numbers. The higher the value, the more efficient the engine is, to put it simply. All these spacecraft will use liquid hydrogen and oxygen as their propellants, and with an ISP of 460, that puts the efficiency right up there with one of my favourite engines, the RL-10. That, of course, we see on Centaur upper stages such as Vulcan, where they run 2 of them. But yeah, this makes the BE-7 along with the RL-10s about the most efficient chemical engines actively in use. The BE-7, however, is a smaller engine that produces up to 10,000 pounds or 4.5 tonnes of thrust. Comparatively, the much larger RL-10 gives almost 2.5 times more thrust, but it is better to have smaller engines, especially for lander vehicles. The Mark 1 lander will just have a single BE-7, whereas the future crew-supported Mark 2 will have 3. Soon after, we even had them share a full 17-minute burn of the BE-7. This would be the longest burn required for the Mark 1 lander to reach the moon as part of its apogee raise manoeuvre. Now, along with that, we also got a close-up look at Blue Origin's second New Glenn booster named Never Tell Me the Odds. All of its modules are now mated and the installation of the much larger BE-4 engines is nearly complete. The booster is now to head to Launch Complex 36 for integration and final testing before launch, and we might even get to see that in just a few weeks. I'd love to see Blue Origin nail the landing this time with a shiny new booster. Place your bets. Will they land on the second ever landing attempt? What do you think? Now, finally, some not-so-fun news from Firefly. During a round of testing at their Briggs, Texas facility on Monday, they had an unfortunate setback. The first stage of their Alpha Flight 7 vehicle concluded with, let's say, a fiery end and obviously a complete loss of that stage. Firefly was quick to point out that all the proper safety measures were in place and all personnel were safe. They have since then been quickly assessing the impact of the test stand. None of their other facilities were affected, so we hope that the immediate damage isn't too severe. Important to remember, of course, that all of this is part of hardware development and testing, just like we see with SpaceX. Every engine, every stage, and every critical component needs to be pushed through rigorous testing so that issues like this can be caught before flight. I'm sure they will quickly determine what went wrong and make the necessary iterations to build a more reliable system. That said, the loss of hardware is still a frustrating setback for them. Their previous Alpha mission back in April also ended in failure after issues during stage separation, which damaged the second stage. We'll just need to be a little more patient before we get to see Firefly Alpha take to the sky again. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. Thanks again to Surfshark VPN for helping us to put all the work that we can into these videos. Check that out from the link below. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next, or maybe these videos. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, I will see you all in the next video.